Welcome everyone, I'm Craig Rayborn, I'm the Executive Director here at Compass. Want to welcome you to tonight's education series, AI for Communities, Using the Right Tool for the Job, with Dr. Tom Sanchez from Texas A&M University. For those who know me or know a little bit about me, I just moved here about a year ago from Houston. So it's kind of nice to have another legit Texan-ish person in the room. I may have actually been in Texas longer though. I was there obviously for a number of years. And another connection to my wife works for Texas A&M also, so it's also nice to have that little connection too. So tonight's presentation is going to be about artificial intelligence. You know, artificial intelligence or AI is a hot topic these days. With questions swirling around when, where, how, and even if or whether it should be used in different circumstances. So tonight, Dr. Sanchez will share his expertise and insight into using AI to address the increasingly complex challenges that local jurisdictions face and what that can mean for all of your communities. He will also delve into the many issues around local agencies must consider when deciding when or how AI should be used to improve efficiency and customer service to best serve their residents. So, quick bio about Dr. Sanchez. So, Dr. Tom Sanchez is a professor in the Department of Landscape Architecture and Urban Planning at Texas A&M University. His research and teaching focus is on planning methods, technology, and transportation. He serves as the American Planning Association's Education Committee Chair, and I know from experience that's a really important job, so thank you for that. And is a member of APA's Artificial Intelligence Foresight Community. This past September, he published his most recent book, AI for Urban Planning, that I've been working my way through for a number of months. And so clearly, we're all going to be in really good hands tonight. And you can find his full bio on the table in the back. So before I turn it over, just some quick housekeeping items to go through. Note we've got soft drinks and refreshments in the back. The restrooms are also out the back door to the right and into the right again. If you did not sign in yet, please do so before you leave, and then sign-in forms are on the back table. Evaluation forms are also on your tables, and so please fill one of those out as well, and then leave it on the table, or you can put it in the basket at the back table. We are taping tonight's presentation, and we will share it later on our Compass's YouTube channel, and we'll also have the slides on Compass's website soon. Our next education series, just to announce that, is scheduled for March 11th and 12th, and we'll delve into the impacts of transformative transportation projects on local communities. And so to learn more about that, you can pick up a flyer at the back of the room, or you can watch your email since you're all now on our list, if you weren't before, and you'll get information about that too. So with that, if you haven't yet, please go ahead and silence your cell phones, and join me in welcoming Dr. Tom Sanchez. Thank you. The speaker is allowed to keep his cell phone.
Well, no, I need to. No, I'm good. Well, thank you. And very nice to be here. Thank you for the invitation to come talk to you. Where I wanted to start out with was kind of finding out a little bit about who's here. And so just kind of real quickly, if we could, just kind of go around and introduce yourself, kind of what you do, and then what your interests are in AI. And you know, if you want to throw in kind of your level of expertise on AI, that would be great too, just so we kind of know who's with us. You want to start, Austin?
Yeah, I'll get us started. I am Austin Miller. I'm the principal planner and planning team lead here at Compass. So certainly a big focus of my job is transportation planning. Also do a lot of the demographics work. So that's something that I think AI might be able to help expedite some of the many hours I've been logging of late doing some of that stuff. So I would say I'm very on the rookie side of AI. I don't use it very much, and I know there's opportunity out there. I don't always necessarily know the right tool and how to use it for the task at hand, and hoping to learn a little bit more about being here. So thank you.
Thanks.
I'm Meg Sonnen, I'm Director of Operations with Compass. I am interested in learning about what tools our team might use and what that might mean for policies and directives and safeguards and good ideas as well. And I have virtually no experience using AI.
Hello, I'm Matthew Pavlik from Canadian County Development Services. I'm Associate Planner. And I'm just interested to learn about how the two intersect and what kind of tools it offers.
I'm Jerry, retired truck driver. I despise AI, and I'm just interested in hearing what other people have to say.
Good. Nice to have you here.
Yeah, hi, again, I'm Greg Rayborn, I'm the Executive Director at Compass. I've been playing around with AI for a few years now, trying to find ways to make both my job and find ways that can support the work of the folks that I work with as well. So I've tried it on a number of things, ranging from editing my documents or looking for grammar errors all the way to digging into legislative proposals and having the AI present summaries and then sort of see how things fit together. And it's so I've learned lessons from that too. So.
I'm Jan Sylvester, I'm a member of the community, and I like to play with AI and see what different things it can do. Like Craig mentioned, quite a variety to create mechanisms and take things apart.
Michelle Barron, I'm a principal planner with Canyon County, and I know nothing about AI other than I feel like there's a great opportunity there. So I'm just here to see what's available.
I'm Sulema Montenegro with the City of Cuna. I'm a communications specialist, and I'm really just wanting to learn so I can take back anything I can to the city. And my knowledge on it is pretty basic, but I've just learned it with a few of them.
Did you want to?
Sure. Hi, my name is Josie. I'm a communication associate here at Compass. I use ChatGPT every day, all the time. I love it. It's good for brainstorming or just double checking things, cross-referencing things. I really love it. I'm excited to learn some more.
And I'm Amy Left, I'm the communication team lead at Compass, and just starting to dip my toe in a little bit, and anxious to learn more.
Well, good. And as you may know, we've got kind of the presentation tonight and then also a workshop tomorrow, and kind of the differences between those are, I'm really kind of focusing on kind of some main themes and topics, some terminology and what I call kind of functionalities, kind of what AI can do. I'm taking the view that I take is over more of kind of a historic and traditional view of what AI has been, and it's been really in the past 3 or 4 years that things changed dramatically with some of the large language models and chatbots that we see now. But still, the underlying tools, I mean, there are so many, and kind of that's one of the reasons why I kind of name this as, picking the right tool for the job, because as we're all sitting at our desks doing our jobs, it's like, how do we know, what tool, we would want to use. This goes back a ways when we're thinking about any kind of technology, and most of my focus too is on community planning. But I think it applies generally to other disciplines and other types of businesses as well. But, for those of you that, use spreadsheets, it's like when those first came out, people would say, well, what am I gonna do? What am I gonna do with this thing for my job, And word processing was a little bit easier. I mean, we, kind of were all typing. We kind of got what that meant, but databases, kind of these other tools, it's like we had to be thinking about what was the application that we needed help with. And I think in this case with the AI, it's kind of lots and lots of what we do. But so hoping to cover like a lot of that ground. Also, I'm going to be saving plenty of time at the end for questions, discussion, whatever it might be, because hopefully you will have some questions and comments. Okay, a little brief history on me. This was the first computer that I used. Actually in 8th grade, it was a DeckWriter 2 terminal, no display, no memory, no processing power. And so everything that you typed, everything that you got back was printed on those sheets of paper. So, and then on the right there is the modem we used because that terminal had no processing power. We had to connect into a central server that gave us some, and only one person could call in at a time. But basically, the modem would be you dial in the number and you get like a fax kind of sound. Are those even around anymore? Anyhow, that weird kind of sound, and then you would have to put it on the acoustic coupler there, and that was your connection to, I don't want to say the internet, that was your connection to being able to process. So it's very basic things that we were able to do. No graphics, certainly. There was no color involved. Mainly what we were doing was we were writing some very, very simple basic programming programs. So it was really about the logic of kind of if this, then do that, ask this question. But that was my first exposure to computing. So 8th grade, I didn't see a computer again until I got to graduate school. So all through high school, all through undergrad, I didn't have any computers in any of my classes. And then when I got to graduate school, it was again these terminal style. We actually had a display, and the first IBM PC desktops came out, and monochrome screen, dual floppy drives, no hard disk storage, and all that. So getting a little, well, no, I'm not getting reminiscent. And then fast forward to today, where I've literally got hundreds of thousands of times, actually infinite amount of more processing power. Compared to that terminal, an infinite amount of storage capability. But even if it was compared to one of the PCs I was using earlier, hundreds of thousands of times the storage, and just and handheld at the at the same time, and the kinds of things that we're able to do with the technology now is amazing. And the point here isn't that I'm old. The point is that this is a very rapid pace of change over kind of like my, one person's career. So for several of you out there, or all of us, 10, 20 years, what are we gonna be, what are we gonna be seeing? And so part of that represents a challenge on kind of keeping up, and then knowing that the technology is changing rapidly. What does that mean for business? What does that mean for, not only computation, but how we do our work, how we communicate, as well as the infrastructure. And I'm not really gonna go into some of the infrastructure issues here involved with what we're seeing with some of the newer technologies, but just, how it's changed our lifestyles. Even just having the mobile device, and now really kind of mobile computing at this scale is pretty amazing, and what I like to think of as a short amount of time. So I'm going to be talking about an overview of AI as a tool, and AI really kind of broadly written, kind of AI being lots of different things for lots of uses, and then thinking about what we mean by, what do we mean by artificial intelligence? Because if we really break that down, artificial intelligence, something like a stoplight with sensors in the ground, compared to when we had somebody standing out in the intersection telling us, okay, when cars could go and when they couldn't. Now we've got a sensor in place, it's picking up the weight of a car, or cars moving by, and then it's changing the signal for us. And even going further than that, we're able to optimize that among whole systems for intersections and streetlights today, in a larger system. And other things, even like a thermostat. The temperature reaches a certain level and something happens. It goes on. So what do we really consider to be, intelligence? And usually that will have something to do with being aware of our surroundings, of our environment, and then typically we're thinking about it with some kind of a computer, or even a mechanical means, where it's gathering that information and then making a decision like we would, given those conditions, given kind of what we're seeing, what we're understanding. And the examples that I gave are very simple, like temperature change, cars at an intersection compared to what we're seeing now. But still, that represented kind of pretty significant change. And then move into what we see with industry and manufacturing today, and changes that we've seen there, and the automation involved. Really, a lot of intelligence is built into those systems through the technology. Wanted to start out with a little bit. I think about AI as an urban planner. I think about AI in the city, as well as AI as tools that I use as a planner. And so some examples that I want to give, we hear a fair amount about these today. With autonomous vehicles and smart cities, virtual simulations or digital twins, predictive capabilities that we have with data, and then also Internet of Things, or basically overall kind of connectedness in urban places. So, and so this is a case where the vehicle itself is, you know, is mostly autonomous, mostly kind of it's on its own. It's taken a lot of programming, it's taken a lot of other AI technologies, computer vision, georeferencing, lots of other kinds of digital communications, you know, in the vehicle itself. But then we're also using those technologies to plan for these vehicles. Okay, we don't have people driving around, or we don't have things like parking demand is supposed to be kind of shifted quite a bit if we don't have people that are parking, getting to their destination, having to leave their car there. If we've got a set or a series of cars that are kind of constantly moving around, kind of meeting that demand. So changes that we're just seeing in terms of the transportation access that's being provided both, and then how we handle supply and demand. So work happening there. Have any of you been in an autonomous vehicle? Okay, so this is, let's see if this works.
But our microphones are only on when you're connected to rider support.
So I'm in the back seat in a Waymo in Los Angeles, and it's telling me to just relax. I could pick my music if I wanted to.
Please keep your seatbelt fastened and remain in the car unless there's a
It's a strange sensation to look, from the back seat and just see the steering wheel moving, cars coming. There was a big trucks that were coming the other way, and it dropped me off. Picked me up, dropped me off right where I needed to go. Scheduled it on my phone. So that when we think about all the technology and the intelligence that was needed, again, not just with a vehicle, but then just kind of, all of the other communications and logistics involved with that to allow a car without a driver, to drive around on the, on streets, is pretty fascinating, I think. Also, how many of you have heard about smart cities? A couple of you. A big term that means lots of things, and really, I think what it really boils down to on smart cities is using technology in the city. So again, kind of sensors for when things are happening, and whether that's congestion, whether that's when trash cans are full and need to be emptied, whether we're monitoring crowds, if we have large events that we're trying to control. But really, it's about embedding these technologies, which can be sensing, visual, kind of sound, environmental characteristics, air quality, for instance, weather, and then being able to capture that information, then use it, kind of, and be able to use it in a way that responds back to that city as a system, and saying, hey, if we have a problem, we can we can send out whatever resources are needed to that location. But so smart cities we heard about, and meaning lots of things. The city of Singapore is doing a lot around smart cities and technologies, and one example of that is referred to as digital twins, where basically from a planning perspective, we're able to have a visual simulation, a digital visual simulation of the place that we're planning. And a lot of that focus today so far, and this is another area that's changing rapidly. We have buildings, we have streets, we have vegetation, we have heat that's being absorbed by surfaces, kind of buildings, and if we're trying to manage these microclimates, for instance, and then the heat that they're holding in and how that's impacting some of these areas. We can put a model together to say, well, what if we increase, what if we increase our street tree canopy in these areas, or what if we orient the buildings a different way, or what is our solar power opportunities here in the built environment? But we've got a simulation of that space. We can look at it in 3 dimensions. And then depending on how many layers of information that we have on that, whether it's the hydrology, whether it's the traffic system, like I said, the buildings, and then on the, then we can have the building information systems, or BIM. It's the inside of the buildings. That's like HVAC, power consumption. It can be movement of people. And so we really get down to kind of that, essentially kind of modeling as close as we can the realities of these places and the the issues that we're trying to plan for. So these technologies are kind of moving along. And then the predictive policing, a lot of cases we're using AI and a lot of the data that we're getting in order to make predictions about what's going to happen, just kind of like what we do in planning in general. We're trying to kind of look at what's been happening and our current circumstances and say, but what about in 10 years from now or 20 years from now? And so, and the city of LA was using some data sources to predict where there might be some crime hotspots or other issues where law enforcement might need to be deployed, and it wasn't well accepted by the community from the perspective, and this is a bit of a recurring theme in AI about the sources of the data. They're saying, okay, if you're building these predictive models based on the past, based on the history of our city, a lot has changed over time. And so if we're going to be making decisions about, say, under-resourced neighborhoods, that had issues, and we're going to extrapolate from there, you're really kind of you're putting them potentially in a bad situation. Again, you're labeling them. You are putting them at a disadvantage. And so I think a lot of it was the thought about, again, the data, the information that was being used, and did it really appropriately reflect what we know about our city today. And so I see a lot of these concerns about AI and data now, in urban spaces, just for people saying, well, what, you're taking my information about what I did and where I was and what I spent money on and kind of what I was doing and all of that. And it's like, I'm not comfortable with that, which I think is completely, kind of natural for us. It's, it's kind of that surveillance ultimately of what it comes down to. A lot of these sensors that are going into these cities are cameras. And, and companies like Google and their Street View products will then try to go in and they'll kind of mask out license plate numbers and people's faces and even the front of people's houses if there are identifiable things, because there's a degree of privacy and confidentiality. Then you used Street View before, like the 3D, yeah. And did you know you can opt out of that, if you've got your car, or if you've got your house on Street View, you can say, I want that to be, you know, I want that blurred out. I don't want the front of my house shown. And I'm wondering, you know, if we're gonna be seeing kind of more of that on an individual level, people just saying, I wanna opt out in terms of the information that's being used. And that was also an issue in a project in Toronto called Quayside, where Alphabet, the company, Google's, which I guess was previously Google, but they've been doing urban work, and they were building some urban public spaces with lots of sensors involved. And from their perspective, they were trying to build a space where they could kind of see what the flows of people were, and they could provide them with information. If there were kids involved, you know, they could sense that and provide a welcoming space and all that. And same thing happened there. Is the project basically died because the public said, this is creepy to walk into this, you know, into this space where we want to kind of hang out for the day, and then knowing, you know, our information is being captured. So some big concerns about that. And then the last one too, Barcelona is doing a lot with technology, and that being, you know, one of their areas, IoT or Internet of Things. Again, kind of having sensors, having the technology embedded or built in to the city. Again, to, you know, be able to detect when, you know, there are disturbances or things that need to be fixed or whatever, you know, whatever it might be, and then that can be communicated back easily. Also with Internet of Things, when we think about that in cities, is I'm carrying my sensor around with me. You know, our cars are sensors. You know, and then we've got the sensors all, you know, kind of around us. And a lot of this information gets back to, private sources that then kind of sell it, you know, public sources that are use it to provide, you know, services or help plan places. And then, you know, which kind of goes up into the cloud or into the internet as well. And so that connectivity, you know, we think of, you know, will have its challenges as we start to be more, we recognize more how much of this information is being collected and how it's being used. But a lot of these technologies. So this mainly comes some terminology here about what's happening kind of at the city level with these technologies. And so now I wanted to move to kind of using AI, you know, as a planner, and I think this goes, you know, beyond planning a bit. So in my presentations, I like to use I use AI to generate, you know, some images that, you know, that I think are kind of fun, and so So I don't know if you can read that prompt, but I basically said, yeah, I'm going to be talking about using AI and picking the right tool for the job. Show a variety of kind of objects, and I was thinking of, you got a piece of wood, and you know, and if you need to attach different things like screws or a nail or tacks or whatever it might be, you know, those are going to take some different kind of tools, you know, and you're going to have to pick the right one. You don't want to use the hammer or the screw, or, you know, just to come up with a kind of a simple kind of portrayal of what that, you know, what the AI would give me. And so this is what it came back with, which I thought was, oh, and I'd also asked to put the banana in there because I wanted something that didn't fit, something that, you know, couldn't be used for a tool, and I wanted to see how it would handle that. But we've got some interesting looking items here. You know, we do have some tacks and screws and kind of a paper clippy sort of thing, but I've got my hammer and the banana. I didn't think this, I had asked for a screwdriver, but it didn't give me one because I was kind of thinking, you know, is you use a hammer or a screwdriver? So I prompted it again. I said, that's great, but I want a screwdriver in the picture. And so just by changing that, and then it came back, and it's got, now I've got a little bit of Salvador Dali, you know, kind of images here with these dripping pieces coming off the side. I got a multi-claw hammer there, another hammer, got my banana. You know, some of these things have kind of changed, but it still didn't get the screwdriver on there. So I said, use the first image, but add a screwdriver. And so that's what it came back to. I love to show this image because it's like, okay, it gave me the screwdriver, it put it on the end of the hammer. It also, you know, it made a drill out of the banana. And thinking about, you know, these are all trained on imagery that it's, you know, that it's basically scraped, you know, harvested from the internet. But what I did was I looked at this and I didn't find a banana drill anywhere online. And so thinking about in this, and I'll come back to this a little bit later, as AI as for idea generation. You know, it may not give you, and when we're trying to be creative about things, it may not give you exactly what you want, but it'll maybe give you something you didn't think about before, kind of in that configuration or that particular way, that may not be your answer, but it may give you another idea. It's like, oh, yeah, maybe you know, but the banana drill is one of my favorites here. So then I said, oh well, I stopped. So the functionalities. So I break this down, and really this is at a basic level of kind of what AI tools do, and we see this for a lot of different. I think this applies to a lot of different types of work that we do, and these in particular also apply certainly to planning. And so and so I just want to run through each of these kind of briefly, but give you a sense, and the purpose for that is to talk about kind of the concept behind that, of each of these, how it fits into AI, and then give some examples about that. And the reason for that is because we're finding that the AI tools, or people are coming up with lots of different ways to apply these tools, you know, because they didn't, you know, they didn't have that opportunity before. It wasn't available, and we're finding that the creativity, I think, is really important as far as the appropriate application of the tool. But these are kind of what underpins AI, and it's not just a chatbot. It's not just, you know, a conversational agent that we ask it something, it gives us something back. There are lots and lots of other things that we can do with it, and that we have done with it historically. And, but we are seeing where a lot of these are being combined, and we're able to use a lot of these tools based on conversation or based on a prompt. So for predictive analysis, we see, if we've got like a traffic pattern, kind of throughout the day, we're trying to detect that. And, we might say, okay, well, traffic's bad, or, morning and evening, kind of off-peak area, less demand, less supply is gonna result. And then we've got these other peaks, for people going to work, people, leaving and going home. And so we want to be able to detect those. And kind of from a planning perspective, we think those are kind of the important things that we want to know about. Those are the areas that we particularly need to plan for, or at least when we're thinking about gauging capacity for facilities and like for power generation, they're having to say, they're kind of having to build for the peak of those periods. So this kind of gets at that a little bit, but being able to detect those through some data analysis methods. And then also so that would have been kind of the usual kind of sensor data or street monitoring data that we could capture those movement patterns. And then we could also have other imagery and say, look at this picture and then tell us where the urban boundary is. So if we're trying to look at kind of what growth over time looks like, how much land are we using up, and we're able to detect some kind of pace here and say, okay, if we've got this, if these are 5-year periods or 10-year periods, where are we going to be at, in 20 or 30 years or further out. So we can use this different kind of data and then have a tool help us read that map and then determine something like a boundary or some kind of a difference. Also patterns, the city of Tuscaloosa is using basically these cameras or these computer vision devices that they're putting on, they had put on, I think it was most or all of the garbage trucks. And so what they wanted to do was have a method in order to basically inventory the whole town and say, where do we see potholes? Where do we see areas that need repair? Where do we see vegetation that's kind of gone out of control? Where we see code violations? And so the trash trucks being a way to, be able to visit kind of, practically every street, in the community at least once a week. And so they worked with the university and built this tool, which now it's called City Detect. And so they used this it was mainly for blight detection. So then they could take not only kind of these models takes lots of training, like how do you know, a particular style of house or the colors or the way it's built, that's, in repair of need or, in need of repair or not. Well, you need lots of information in order to, basically imagery, to train that model to know a bad roof when it sees it, or, or some other issues involved with it. So they're getting that information, but then they're also getting the locational information too, which they're able to map. And then they've been working with, they were working with some nonprofit organizations to go into some of these communities, if it's a case of being able to help the homeowners, certainly for street maintenance, purposes. They could identify areas that were in need. So convert that to kind of the geographic form of the data, or answer the where question. And in planning, we see patterns are, that's a big part of kind of what we do, although I don't think we necessarily think about it, that way, but a lot, when we look at population trends, or we look at growth patterns, and these other ways, we're learning over time in order to be able to detect what a pattern looks like. And that's one thing, and I mentioned Mandelbrot at the end there, because the Mandelbrot patterns, he actually worked in the finance field. And so when you think about kind of financial cycles and being able to, predict what the future of your investments is going to be, or where change is going to occur, a lot of that is about, being able to pick up on the trends, being able to pick up on the cycles, being able to, pick up on patterns that happen. And so, which is a lot of what we do also in planning, taking that historical data and making decisions about what that means for today or what that might mean for tomorrow. And AI is very, very good at that, given the data that we provide for it. Also automating tasks, and so we might have steps in our process that we have to do for planning purposes, collecting a lot of data, cleaning it, putting it into a model. Could be like a statistical model if we were going to predict, what our school enrollment or demand is going to be. That's going to be a function of jobs that are being generated, people moving in and out, changes in demographics and kind of where the kids are going to be. But we can put that as a step in our model, and we might find a case. We've got to put logic in here where we find a case where, hey, this thing that we found doesn't make any sense. And so we might have to loop back up and say, we need to collect some more data or information, or find out if, we had some errors in it. But this automating tasks is now what we're seeing a lot with AI. We can take these and as steps in a process, or as what's being referred to as agents, in order to do each of these and then combine them into a process, particular outcomes. And so a computer program is one of the examples that we think of as automating tasks. We have statements that are different functions doing things for us. We can say if this, then that, and what it's going to be doing with the data, or perhaps operating machinery, or whatever it might be. AI for handling large amounts of data. And this goes to the kind of the smart city, the Internet of things, all of the sensor data. And two, when we're thinking about planning for places, or when we're managing some of these spaces, and just thinking all of the information that's being generated, kind of like all the time. Whether it's movement of people, movement of vehicles, what kind of vehicles, pedestrians, bicyclists, trucks, cars, if we've got autonomous vehicles on there, conditions of the roadway, heat levels, the vegetation, other environmental characteristics, the condition of the infrastructure. Think about all of the things that are going on kind of in an urban area, or even in a particular space like that. that might be useful information for us to look at. Snow removal, the street lighting, the waste management, all of the energy consumption that's going on, and if it's a question of, we're trying to be more efficient about using these spaces. Well, how do we grab all this information and then how do we make sense of it? Because, these are, in a lot of cases, these are billions or trillions of data points that are being analyzed, and then back to the pattern recognition thing is then we're finding that because of the kind of the computation power of the AI tools, it being able to find kind of where some of those patterns are occurring much easier than we can, either reviewing the data manually or even using some of our traditional statistical methods, but just being able to look at the co-occurrence of a lot of these things at the same time in lots of different combinations, which is one of the methods that AI uses, is trying every possible solution and seeing which ones kind of fit or might be appropriate. So taking all of those possibilities, because it doesn't know in a lot of cases, but this is driving part of the demand for it, is just having all of this data available, which we didn't before, or we couldn't capture very, very easily. One example was the city of Long Beach in California was using they were working with a firm that had an AI tool that would scrape. It ended up being like mostly social media data, so the mayor's office, the city, but they wanted to find out kind of what are all these things that are being said across, or that were being communicated by people using these different platforms. What were they saying about the city that then they could use that information to say, what are we doing good? What do we need to improve on? Well, obviously there are people that are saying a lot of things that aren't useful at all. So a big part of that whole process is just clearing out the data that's not talking about, city services, which they were mostly interested in. But in this period, it was over 5 million of these messages or pieces of data that they came across to analyze. And they also grab data. They have some portals for the city that people can make comments on, or they can call in, and whether it's a complaint or suggestion, whatever it might be, but they're able to put all of that together along with the social media data. But lots and lots of data, and I'll come back to this example. The predictive analysis I mentioned, and again about the patterns, and we could have something like continuous data that's about kind of a direction something is moving, traffic pattern throughout the day or the month or day a week. Could be the population pattern, could be number of kids that are in our, anything that's going to be kind of along a scale like that. Or we can be working with data that's on a more discrete level. Well, it's not a number I'm predicting, like the number of people that are going to be in our community in the future, but it's a particular kind of state, or it's a condition, or it's a category instead. And we see where AI tools are being trained on lots and lots of these data to look at how, and I'm sorry, I'm pointing back at that screen here, pointing looking at, you know, how decisions are being made. So this is called a decision tree. And so able to take lots and lots of data and put it in it. So another example might be like mode choice for, you know, who decided to drive their car to work, or to drive with somebody and give somebody a ride, or they took the bus, or they walked, took a bike. What kind of factors went into that led to some kind of a discrete outcome, or a choice? Again, lots and lots and lots of data going into that, and then helping us figure out what this decision tree looks like, but then also being able to run the data through that to come up with predictions, you know, for those particular kind of outcomes that are discrete, or that are like groups or classes or categories. And decision support, and we're seeing this grow dramatically, where the decision support is really kind of the integration of a lot of these tools on the data collection and cleaning side, building scenarios with that, which then might be communicated to a community stakeholders, or to other groups that give some feedback. They go back into that process, or that data is integrated. A lot of times that communication will happen visually, and so you know, different ways to show different conditions that are happening in cities, or different scenarios. A lot of times that can be visual if we're thinking about streetscapes and parks and other areas of town, new developments that are being proposed, and then so then we're integrating these different parts into the process. So we're not just you know, separating out our different tools, but this connects with automating tasks as well, as we get these different tools to talk to each other and help us in the decision making, or at least the recommendation making process. And language processing, which we know AI is doing is doing a lot of. And what's that? Oh, I'm sorry. So being able to take, you know, lots and lots and lots of words. We might have a community meeting, we might have a stack of reports, we might have the internet, you know, and kind of anything that's, you know, that are words in digital format that we can, again, look for patterns. And so when we're analyzing the language, when we're trying to figure out what are the topics that people are talking about, what are the services that are being provided by the city that people are happy about or not so happy about? What are all, you know, when we're considering environmental impacts, and I've got a big stack of environmental reports that have been done in the past that I could learn something from, but I don't necessarily want to sit down and read through all of them. We've got some AI tools for being able to process huge amounts of data, or words in this case, and find those patterns. And the patterns really comes back to, you know, meaning is a pattern in terms of word sequence, or what we call, you know, in AI processing, tokens, or kind of parts of words, and trillions of these that are being analyzed or used to train models. And so back to that City of Long Beach example. This is what they use the AI tool or the platform that they were using. to find out what were the topics that were being mentioned the most. And at this time, for these data, it was about public health, crime, other national and state politics that were having local impacts, and so forth. And so these data, when this was happening, was actually during the period of COVID. And so, because we want to, public health is at kind of makes sense, but a lot of these were information requests for being able to get vaccinated, where can I get tested, where can I get other kinds of services, related to COVID. And so that put that up at the top. And so we can detect the topics that are being discussed, and then the other part of it that they were interested in is the sentiment, or what were people, okay, well, they mentioned, the schools or retail, for instance. Well, were they criticizing it, or were they saying, positive things about it? So this again is, in using the AI and doing the language processing, sentiment in that word order or the word order in those patterns is what's telling us, or at least indicating, whether, somebody's happy about what they're saying or not. Still a little challenging when we get to things around sarcasm, though, but, they're still finding those as patterns as well. So this is in addition to the topics, but I think when we think about something like the sentiment, it's really starting to get a little more depth in thinking about what the language means, or what's being said. And then optimization tasks. I kind of referred to this too, with having lots and lots of data and being able to take in, multiple dimensions about an issue that we're looking at. One simple one might be the shortest route. So if I've got, deliveries that need to happen in a certain sequence, and a certain number of stops, what's the appropriate order, so I deliver things. This is kind of an older type of issue that we've dealt with before. But then when we're taking kind of these questions and then looking at that at scales of millions or even billions of nodes on that pattern, on something like a route or a network, how do we optimize to get it to flow through there, so that we're being efficient, meeting whatever needs are being expressed by these locations, and then that can also go to multiple dimensions. And so when we hear about with AI that the models are thinking in 6 and 7 or 8, or more dimensions. Well, we can't even really visualize that. A single dimension would be like a point. 2 dimensions, would be a plane. 3 dimensions would be a surface. 4 dimensions, we could say a 4th dimension could be another axis here, or a 4th dimension could be movement, over time. A 5th dimension, a 6th dimension, or even hundreds of dimensions. But it's the processing capability and the ability to kind of organize that data and then answer questions with it that is important. So that optimization, how do we use our resources most effectively and efficiently given certain constraints? And I'm putting these all all these have been pretty simple examples. But what we're seeing is that AI is applied really kind of at a much larger scale, you know, for, you know, some of the questions that it's looking at and trying to answer. So just, I realize being a, you know, simple, but the terminology kind of, you know, conceptually, what's being accomplished by the tools are kind of fit into these areas. Okay.
Oh. Why?
Actually, let's take a quick break, and because I'm going to switch gears onto the kind of different sort of topic. Any kind of thoughts or questions kind of on the AI, capabilities, kind of tools, or yes?
How on earth do you audit or vet the responses you get from whatever these processes? I spoke to Idaho Fish and Game people recently, and there have been some hunters that used some AI. I didn't press to know which one, and they all got cited because the data was out of date as to which area they were allowed to hunt in. And at no point have you discussed how you vet. Now, I could understand if it's restricted to the data that you feed it, but if you're reaching out to a large language model, you have no idea what the hell they're feeding you.
Yeah. I'll talk about that a little bit in this session here on data bias and, you know, some of those issues that we have to look at, but let me just mention something on those lines too, is yeah, that is one of the big concerns. Okay, you're talking about millions, billions, trillions, you know, and up points of data that we're getting an answer from or a recommendation. How do we know? Or even the simpler example of public comments. You know, if we needed to, we could go back and ground truth it. We could look and say, did somebody actually say that? And where did that come from? We would want to build our tool in a way that we can then reference back to, you know, where that came from. And then it might be like, hey, that was a comment that happened 20 years ago, or that happened, that's not even applicable, you know, anymore. So that's, you know, what we, you know, needs to be built back in the system. So, and quickly on that is, you know, part of that is, at least, you know, in discussions that I have and concerns over AI taking people's jobs, well, there's a whole, you know, that the auditing part of all of this in itself, I think, becomes, you know, a huge responsibility. And they say, well, we can build other models that can do that work for us. Well, I don't know, but that's a very important point. Yeah.
Couldn't you just ask AI to use data from a certain?
Can you trust it? Would you like to buy a bridge?
Well, I don't think I'd want to look at every single available place you could fish or couldn't fish on a certain date, but could we ask, show me the most up-to-date current ones?
Yeah.
I notice with AI, depending how I ask the question, how detailed I am, I get different responses. I think the response I want is going to be really obvious within a certain direction, and it's not. I have to explain myself very thoroughly.
Yeah, and that's a very important point too, because asking the question, and I think that's one thing that, you know, at least for me, these AI tools, I think I'm learning from is how to ask a better question, you know, to get kind of the specific thing that I wanted. Also with the validation that I'm looking for too. Anymore, I will ask a question about, you know, what's happening and what are the sources that you're using in order to, you know, to say that. And I've had several times it come back and say, oh, you know what? Yeah, that wasn't correct information. You know, here's the real stuff. And I've checked that, and that hasn't been real either. So to take kind of multiple iterations, before it, it gets it. If it gets it. So, so these are great points for us to think about, kind of when we're starting to rely on a tool that's processing lots and lots of data that we wouldn't even think of kind of taking our time to spend on it, and the ability to even kind of track down some of these things. And so that goes to, being specific about prompts, for instance, with that example, and making sure that sources are cited. Where did you get that from? If you haven't, ask ChatGPT, about yourself sometime. And if you've got anything you can point it to, and it's just come up with some kind of ridiculous things about people that I know and me, but then it ends up being a conversation in that case. But anyhow, good points. And the other thing is that AI it's learning. It's a big learning process. It took huge amounts of data, dumped it in there, had to try to organize that, and I'm thinking about, in this case, like the chatbots and the large language models. Really, it can be like people that are seeing a lot of information for the very first time, or the very first time you've seen something. And I think of the example, like with the way kids learn, and you see kids on the street. Hey, there's the doggy, or the kitty. Well, how do they learn that? They see that, a bunch of times, and then the people that they're with, help them with that and say, oh no, that's not a kitty, that's a doggy, or and there's this learning that goes on, and that's exactly what I think is going to be. It is a very important function of the way that we're using it. Is like the examples that we heard back there. Is we can't just take directly, kind of the outputs we get, but we have to be very conscientious and critical consumers of what we get back out of it. And then hopefully that will kind of feed back in and improve the tool. Good, great points. Anything else? Okay, so the question of using the technology responsibly, and we hear a lot about related to AI is the ethics on this, and a lot of it being seen as relying on computers, or relying on these other methods for intelligence and making decisions, making recommendations with lots of information that we may not have access to. How do we trust it? And I think a big part of that comes back to how we use these tools, because inevitably, we have to consider those questions of bias and fairness, and how the data was assembled, how it was processed, how it was put together, like the case of the LA predictive policing, concerns about, okay, you took the data, but we're not convinced that kind of the situations that you're comparing it to today kind of match up with when and where you got that data, being transparent and making sure that your methods are explainable, and I think about this a lot with planners, is, I think with, this cuts across a lot of disciplines and businesses too, but, working in the public realm, it's, being able to disclose what methods you're using, and also being able to explain what that means. I'll come back to that though. The privacy and data sensitivity, we've mentioned before, and yes, this human oversight of the limitations in the models that are being used, and I really think that's key, and that will be part of how we see, I think, the workforce change in those areas that are going to get affected. So what are some of these sources or concerns about the types of bias? And so on the data bias side of it, and this relates to the sampling as well. If I only collect information from one side of town, or if I collect data from another jurisdiction or a county, is that going to be appropriate for me to use that in local, circumstances? It might be, depending on what I'm looking at, but it's going to be biased. It's going to be oriented towards that area or those situations where it was collected, and whether that kind of historically when that was, or locationally when that was, or the circumstances under where it happened. That biased data means it only reflects kind of a portion of what's really, of what's happening in that, in that population or that universe or that area that we're looking at. So a big part of that has to do with the data collection, not only kind of how we sample or where we get it from or how much we get it from, but are we collecting the right kind of data? Are we getting the right kind of variables? Are we getting the right kind? Are we tracking the right kind of characteristics for the problems or the questions that we're looking at? So we just can't grab whatever's available and say, oh well, this is all we could get, so I guess that's what we'll use. Where if that has the potential to represent some kind of or misrepresent conditions that we're looking at. Also, on the in designing the algorithms, we're also playing an important role on building kind of the model structure that AI is using, and by that I mean kind of what variables are we including, or do we think are important? If we're trying to predict something like, school population, levels. Well, what are those factors that are associated with that? We can't just use the number of people, we can't just use just demographic characteristics, because economic conditions has a big, impact on that. Locations of schools and the resources that are made available. So how are we building kind of that intelligence or that model that's helping us answer that question? If we have just like on the data side, if we have a limited amount of variables or information, and in that case I mean characteristics that we're thinking about, that's going to have a biasing impact on the processing of that information. And then also the interpretation bias. You can get results out that can be read any way you want, depending on the motivations or the objectives of whoever's reading that report. And so So, and I think in a lot of that we can think of falling a lot on the human side of it, but it also can be on kind of how we're applying, these results, how we're interpreting what their benefits are, and then using it for our purposes. So the bias can come from a lot of different sources. Usually we're thinking about kind of the inputs, but it can also be the outputs of the of using some of these tools. The transparency and explainability, I think, is a big part of this. If we're going to start to use AI tools, which lots of us are still kind of learning about, and you'll go into a public meeting, and we'll hear the jargon, and we don't really know what they're talking about or how they came up with some kind of prediction. I might not necessarily want to interrupt the meeting and ask, or I think a big part, as being, a public servant in our case, or as a planner, is building that trust. We are doing, our work for the benefit of the public and the well-being of our communities. We need participation in that process. We need involvement from the state, from our stakeholders. We need them to, that trust, and that we need that to go both ways. But a big part of that is being able to explain, okay, if I'm talking about a particular method that I use to come up with something that might be a fairly complex prediction or scenario, how did you do that? Why did you think the bike lane should go over there? Why did you think the park should go on that side of town? Or, and if I was using some of these tools, but being able to explain what kind of information went into that, what kind of tools, were being used, and disclose that. But realizing that in a lot of those cases, that can also mean that times need to be spent on increasing awareness about what, some of these tools, might mean, and what some of these data sources are, where we got it from, how reliable they are. And so, but that's part of building the trust. Justifying any of the decisions that we're making, and more than decisions, I mean kind of recommendations, but being able to justify them, with the data, the information we have, with the public support or the input that we've gotten, and being clear and transparent about that as well. Having built-in bias detection in there, kind of like the point that was brought up, this has to be thought about, and thinking about, okay, if we're collecting, these data from public spaces, how do we know we're doing it the right way? How do we know we're, using the right methods, using the right sensors, capturing the right, kinds of information that's not going to lead us kind of in a different direction. But that bias, I think, and that comes back to the question of the need for, auditing on all of these processes. And the legal compliance on some of these things, where laws are involved or enforceable, rules are involved. We need to make sure that we're adhering to those laws in this process. We're just not making a recommendation about a certain action that is in fact, not legal, but that we're able to build that in or use that along with our tools to make sure that they've have all of that legal expertise or have that reviewed as part of that process. And then also building in a means for the error detection. Kind of related to the bias detection, but also in those cases where it's just what we got is just, it's wrong, it's not right. What do we have in place? Who's gonna be responsible for doing that? Do we have the resources available for doing that? Do we have some guidelines? Do we have do we have that process in place? And also documentation is a big part of that as well. We found an error, we fixed it, here's how we fixed it. And, some kind of level of certainty that that particular error won't happen again. Being transparent, being able to explain it, I think is very important. Privacy and data sensitivity, I mentioned some of these before on the data side, especially when we're capturing these data about people, in our community, or information about their activities. It's kind of amazing a lot of, this data, like on my cell phone, where I'm at, people I'm talking to, people I'm spending, things that I'm spending my money on, we hear about it, all the time, things that people are regretting that they emailed or, texted somebody or sent, if it's digital, it's out there, and it's almost, I think in a lot of cases, it's got a life of its own, depending on where it's being stored, who's managing it, but it can kind of flow wherever, it wants. So being very careful about that. And in the world of planning, we don't usually use sensitive information about people's health records or financial records or much data about individual, kind of activities. But we might come across the data set that has names on it or social security numbers or other things that we shouldn't have. We shouldn't kind of made it our way. But we do. So we have to think through what do we do to, in those cases to correct that. Lots of sources for those data. If we're thinking about like the social media data, our housing data, all of our different kinds of activities that are now in some kind of digital form that are out, that are out there. How do we protect that in terms of the public services that we're providing? And then the human oversight and the model limitations. And here, again, we've talked a little bit about this, but being responsible, being accountable for the outcomes. And probably other industries that I don't know if, anything about, but I have to imagine, like in healthcare and finance, where some of these tools are being made, where they're using very sensitive, they may be using some very sensitive data, and if it's for testing purposes and things like that, you think about the responsibilities that go along with that. And I can only imagine that those will expand as we have the capability to handle these data. But kind of back to our case, making sure that that oversight's in place. And I don't think that means just within our own organization or internally, but I think it's an opportunity, and some communities have been doing this, where they've been getting stakeholders, they've been getting community members to be part of their AI kind of task forces. To be there, to know what kind of tools are being built or are being thought about, hear about what kind of data are involved, what the plans are for these tools, and be able to ask questions, make suggestions, and give some feedback on the appropriateness. And also, hopefully in that process, also be, communicate that out to, to the people that they know and get feedback from. So I think that external kind of, piece of it is very important too. And that can be a challenge. That means more time, more organizing, more work that needs to be done if we're going to be including more of these, more of these stakeholders and people involved, and more input, more ideas, and more criticism, perhaps. But I think that that's going to be an important part given the potential impacts. The transparent decision making, again, making sure it's clear how what process that we went through, and then the standards and the guidelines. And we're seeing cities, particularly with some of the generative AI, like the image generation, also the text generation, video generation, and being careful about what the sources of that information was. Like, one area of concern is around copyright. Can I produce images of some kind of architectural treatments, and I don't know, I'm just throwing this out there as an example. If that may be somebody else's work that I'm not attributing them to, and we see this with lots of different imagery that's coming together in some of the generative AI, is we don't know where all the parts of that picture came from, and did anybody get permission? Do we need permission? Do we need to give some kind of attribution? We're sorting a lot of that out, but cities and jurisdictions are building their guidelines on them. Some as strict as, we're not going to use these at all. We're just not going to take a chance. On through, well, we can utilize these tools, for the appropriate reasons, but then we're documenting kind of our whole process along the way, so that it's transparent. And then I think the city of Boston is known for them. It's either Tempe or Tucson that has some guidelines. Barcelona in Spain has some guidelines that are being looked at. And some cover not only the use of AI tools, but then also kind of data collection and how that happens in public spaces. And then the human in the loop. And that's a term that, these systems should, in the context of kind of public planning, public service, public governance, nothing should be generated by AI that just goes out the door and becomes a decision, or makes its way into some kind of decision-making process without some level of review, whatever that looks like. But it's a person or persons that are involved with that process. And now we're having to design some of these to, based on kind of the magnitude of data that we're working with on these things. What are the appropriate tools, or what are the most what are the best tools for humans to be using in order to audit and to evaluate some of these outcomes. Okay, and how to get started with some AI tools. There is lots and lots and lots out there, and I think YouTube, it's got like everything else. It's got, you know, some great ideas out there, in general on AI sorts of things, seen some in planning. And then the American Planning Association has a knowledge center, which they've been building up around AI. And they've been doing I think they've been doing a really good job of thinking through kind of as a profession, what, you know, some of these issues might be in the context of planning. So and there's also a technology division within APA that's doing a lot of work on it, but a lot of good resources available there. And then I've got some training or some videos on, if you've heard of Plan Edison, it's a website platform for planners, kind of all things planning, and they've got training videos there. I've got a four video set that just the fourth one came out on generative AI, and there was a 3 video series just on AI in general. But they've got hundreds and hundreds of video tutorials on like kind of all kind of urban and planning related topics out there. And then I also have a monthly column on Plan Edison about AI and kind of AI issues. And the one that was supposed to come out tomorrow is on data centers. And so kind of some interesting conversation helped me learn about some of the what's happening, what some of the concerns are there. And then Planning Advisory Service report that I did for APA and an article on AI and ethics for planning, and then the book that Craig mentioned. I kind of chuckle a little bit about the first report that I did, because that came out in 2022. My report was due in December of 2022, and in November of 2022, ChatGPT came out. So I had been writing about AI for urban planning for, I don't know, over a year and a half or something like that. And I didn't have anything in there on chatbots with like a month to go. And so there's a bit in there, but you know, this stuff's changing so fast that you know, it's probably everything that I said in there is obsolete by now. But anyhow. So summary of the key points. I think there's several things that I've said several times. AI's lots of different things. We need to think about kind of what our objectives are. This whole idea of keeping a human in the loop, and then the whole kind of oversight on all that's very important. And then also, I think, kind of organize, or at least as an organizational level, making sure that you've got some guidance that's being put together and developed, and that will change over time as well, is a key part of this. Two things that I didn't mention a lot about, which is a whole kind of separate things, is issues about what AI and the impacts on employment are going to be, particularly planners. Planners asking, is it going to take my job or not? And then the other land use and environmental resource issues around things like data centers as well. But more on that later.
That's kind of a big question. I recognize, first of all, you're not an attorney, so this may be a little too far out of bounds. But you mentioned the copyright issue, and I was at a workshop a couple of years ago where this speaker was an attorney. He basically spent an hour and a half hammering on, do not use generative AI, you will be sued for copyright. It was basically the message that came out of that. And then locally here, we've had, we actually had a little business that was erroneously reported through an AI-generated article in the paper that it was going out of business. And their business dropped off significantly. And TBD, but maybe a lawsuit over that. And then also we've had conversations internally for things using such like, using Otter or something else to take notes in a meeting.
Yeah.
And it doesn't necessarily get things right, especially, attributing who said what, and fear of somebody then using that and all of a sudden, a quote or something misattributed. So, all of that is a lead up. What do you see as kind of the legal ramifications, kind of the landmines? Is there insurance coverage now, or where is that going?
That's an excellent question. I write about AI. I work with publishers that say you can't use AI for anything. In the writing and particularly on the graphics. I can't draw. I'm not good graphically, and I'm writing about AI, but it's like don't use any of these AI tools to generate graphics or illustrations that are going in for these exact reasons. And the publishers are particularly concerned about it, around things around copyright, and, kind of these, ownership of these materials. I think it was somebody like Google or Microsoft, somebody from one of those companies, I said, and probably regretted saying this, was once it's on the internet, it's public, it's in the public domain, which isn't true. But that's the challenge, is when all these things get in digital form, it's so easy to get it, copy and paste it, kind of use it for whatever purposes. Legally, I can't even imagine what enforcement would be like on something like that with all of these. I'm just speaking of like graphics as the example. All the graphics that are being generated with some of these tools, who's out there, trying to monitor that, or just say, there was a class action lawsuit for a publisher. Actually, it was a publisher of one of my books, where one of the big AI firms took thousands of books and used that in their model training. And now there was a big lawsuit that came back, and now the authors are going to get something back out of it. But how many times can something like that? I'm just having a hard time imagining what that kind of enforcement and that just kind of ongoing process looks like. Yeah.
So somebody dealt with this issue. If I compose on a grand piano, does Steinway get a cut?
Right. Yeah.
It gets fascinating as it gets weirder and weirder.
Right.
Because it's like, who'd have thunk of that?
Right. And like with artists, is any as an artist, have they not been influenced by other artists when they make their work? How do they that might be getting a little more abstract, but that's an important question. I think kind of legally, for organizations, being able to track that and be careful, I guess. Does Compass have some guidelines in place?
Not really. We have a little bit in our social media policy about others using like AI generated posts, but that's the extent of it.
Yeah.
I mean, I have kind of a related question, or just interested in your thoughts. I can put some guardrails around what my staff does internally and say, you need to make sure you're aware of the sources and that
Right.
this information that you're developing is accurate. If Josie wants to generate social media posts with bananas in them, I'm not overly concerned, but you know, if you're looking up information. What I get concerned about is as the writers of those reports, and we put out a housing study or we put out a traffic model, maybe not the traffic model, and somebody else uses AI to summarize that and
Yeah.
the tool gets it wrong.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
How do we cope
And it's
with that,
attributed
right?
to
Like,
us.
and attributed to us, or Compass says this is what's happening, similar to
Yeah.
the news article about a business going out of business. And,
Yeah.
you know, just right before I came down, I was looking up information, factual information, and then Google AI popped out stuff that I clearly know is wrong. Like, I didn't even
Yeah.
have to look it up to know it was wrong, but there it is. So, I don't know, just thoughts on that. We work
Yeah.
really hard on those studies and reports and spend years
Yeah.
on them, and then for them to be summarized in seconds
Sure.
incorrectly is
Right.
jarring.
Yeah, and I think that's, you know, why that attribution and the sourcing, you know, can be so important, but like with the example that you gave, where it's actually, you know, it's been misrepresented, kind of what, you know, what was in that report or something. I guess we have libel, you know, sorts of lawsuits that happen. Are we gonna see a whole new area of law, or maybe this is already happening, you know, cases like that? I was working on a tool for helping planners build comprehensive plans, and so I thought, well, it'd be great to, you know, put a lot of comprehensive plans together and basically like a large language model kind of chatbot. And then I was wondering, well, can I do that? Can I take Boise's land use plan or comprehensive plan and pull it into my tool and use it? I'm not even sure what the answer is. I imagine these plans are in the public domain, but if I'm not sure. And I think your legal counsel is gonna have to be the person people to check with on this, yeah. A great question.
Any other questions? Craig, was that a?
Oh, I've got, my list of questions is so long, I fear that I need extra time.
There's tomorrow.
I do want to ask, like, some of the trends that you're seeing in AI usage beyond, you know, like some of the specifics, like, for example, I started out my career writing zoning ordinances. And I've been wondering whether there are potential AI applications that, not the writing part, but like the zoning ordinance itself could essentially be replaced with a well-engineered prompt.
Yeah.
That can then assess developments as they come in against all the different criteria and the outcomes that are desired. I mean, I think what really triggered this was you had Alexander's pattern language picture up, and that, I was like, oh my gosh, that suddenly, I see this as I mean, are there experiments around that, or you know, agencies trying that kind of application?
I don't know about agencies that are trying that, but there is research that's kind of going in that way, and questions that are being brought up, kind of precisely what you're saying. It's like, you know, when we think about kind of way back when, you know, whenever plans, you know, started, you know, we needed to put something on a piece of paper, or a report or whatever form it was, because we wanted to communicate it and be able to refer back to it. Well, now we've got this ability to do something, like you're saying, so much of this stuff dynamically. It's like, I guess we want to have some kind of picture in our mind, what our future's gonna, you know, what's our future gonna look like? And if we're talking about, you know, zoning or kind of, you know, land use, you know, how much are we gonna have of each type and where it's laid out and how it's gonna be connected to each other. But, you know, the decision-making about that, you know, could that be happening in real time? I think with the information that we have available, not with kind of our assumptions that we had 10 years ago when we put the plan together, although we do make changes along the way. So, yeah, that's a fascinating. Yeah, that's a great. I was, you know, with what we're seeing with some of the, oh, well, no, go ahead with the other question. I was gonna
Well, no,
go off in
I
a
may
different
tell
tangent.
you like tomorrow or something on your way to the
Okay.
airport, I know, but, we've got two folks here from Canyon County. So that's the neighboring county, from where we are right here. They're part of Compass. And one of the issues that I know that they're looking at in their comprehensive planning challenges right now really is around agricultural land preservation. And I was kind of wondering about like applications, and this kind of ties back to what the first question I had, but it kind of ties like the ways in which AI is used for, say, permit review versus policy development and shaping, and kind of translating, you know, all of those different, you know, those the functions that you went through, and kind of how those are being applied to those different types of like planning department activities, much more specifically. And again, sort of one of those things like, are there examples that, you know, that we can be pointing to that can, you know, help equip planners for that, as well as, you know, when we go to our board and they go to their commissioners and we're trying to help solve problems. You know, there's a lot, I mean, you went through all the different forms of bias and all the different forms of error, and the corrections that are needed, but is the human in the loop enough to kind of keep things on track so that you get to a result that is acceptable? And has the AI, when you've done that, is the AI going to have ended up providing something, maybe this is rhetorical, philosophical, but is it going to end up having provided something that's more than what, you know, what would have been developed just through like the standard processes of where we have public input and data analysis and the feedback loops, you know, the standard planning methodology type pieces.
Yeah. And I think this is where we're seeing in a lot of research now is these comparisons and kind of these test cases. Well, planner uses, you know, this large language model to help with, you know, build, change, you know, zone change, whatever it might be, or, you know, did it the, you know, the old way, the current way. What kind of differences do we see? Well, in some cases we might not know for a few years on what the real impact would be, but what kind of efficiencies did we gain in that process? But so I think there's still a lot of evaluation that needs to be done on these, and again, I think this is an important you know, thing to be cautious about is, okay, we start using these tools, we have to make sure that we step back and say, is this doing it any better than the way we did it before? Because we're gonna have to make a big investment of training time, potentially data and other computing resources and those things. But is it even, are we doing any better or not? And I think that has to be intentional, because you have to make yourself stop at certain points of time and say, okay, now we need to look at some of the things that we did. Is there a way to gauge whether it was better or not? Are we able to plan better today because we have computers?
Yes.
Probably be a lot of people that said, I don't really see any difference. No. We had hand-drawn maps and we got, people from the community together. We kind of made some decisions. Yeah. Well, maybe we can draw our maps faster now and do some of these things. But I think that's an excellent question. The one area kind of related to what you're saying that I think, that a big area that we stand to gain, I think, is in knowledge management. So how do we keep track of all these plans we had, even some of the old plans, kind of the history of where we're at? How do we take, the community input? Where do we, kind of take other, our guidelines, our regulations, our laws, and how do we, and think about the experience where we have, senior planners that retire and they leave, and the experience and the knowledge that they take with them out the door that we may not have been able to capture. I don't know exactly, how we would do that, other than what they were involved, the products that they were involved with, but, their notes, their work, what other types of intelligence that we get off that, and then how do we use that as a tool? And also, how can we leverage some of the work that other communities are doing? And and it might be like that idea generation thing, like, oh, well, this other city did it this way. Here's what it looked like. Nah, that's not the way we're gonna do it. But it may give us an idea to try something else. But being able to have that, in an easily accessible means. I think we're seeing this a lot more and more of thinking about kind of a chatbot, kind of large language model thing where we can just keep on putting stuff into it. But the local context ends up being what's really important from a planning perspective. How do we make sure that we're focusing on, where we are here as we try to, use all of this other information that's coming from everywhere else. So, some big questions, I think.
I've got one more. We're already out of time. You got 1 minute to answer the next question. In academia, how is it changing what and how you're teaching? Like, not teaching like the classes, but like, how are you changing how you're preparing the people that I'm going to be interviewing for jobs?
Well, I'll give 2 quick examples. I've got an undergraduate class that is about basically introduction to cities. And the last several times I've taught it, I don't have any written assignments. Because when I started, having the written, when ChatGPT and all these started coming around, I started seeing the same things written again and again and again, handed in. Might have been a coincidence, I don't know. So the assignments that I've gone to, at least for now, are all oral presentation videos, either individuals or in groups. So the groups have to talk to each other. they have to discuss what the issues are, they have to decide what they're gonna present, and then they have to talk. I haven't figured out what I'm gonna do about the writing thing, because that's built into our other milestones for, you know, exams and dissertations and master's theses and all that, so. The other quick example is, teaching statistics with programming languages. I had to spend so much time on the programming languages, like where I spend more time on that than the statistics. I don't teach anything about programming now, because they plug in the question or the analysis that they need to create, and it writes the code for them. And this is something I spent the first couple of classes going over. Okay, here's what the process of handwriting code is about. Here's what the statement does. Here's what these different functions do. But it's just like with the written assignments. You're gonna use the tools that are available, and that's what's happening with the coding. And we hear that happening in the whole, you know, kind of computer science realm. Is programmers are. That's changing incredibly now. So,
Is there like any, and I'm sorry folks, like I said, I can probably keep going here for a while, but is there any evolution towards teaching planners more to be the human in the loop, as opposed to being the producer of X, Y, or Z, so that, you know, they still have to have the expertise in order to realize whether something's an hallucination or not.
yeah.
But is there any movement towards that?
Well, we're still struggling with trying to figure out exactly what the loop is that they're going to be, you know, part of, or that they're going to be assessing or evaluating, or, you know, or using. And again, because, you know, these things are moving so fast. Again, it's kind of like, let's try to get, you know, the students as literate as possible about kind of what's out there. And like in planning, happens, learning about planning happens so much on the job. You know, that's where they're gonna, you know, where we're gonna work out a lot of these things. Use of these tools, what's appropriate, you know, the right tool for the job, those sorts of things. So it's kind of a non-answer, because we don't know. We don't know either. Schools are AI is a big, I wouldn't say challenge, but it is a challenge in the sense of we're still trying to figure it out.
I'll stop there, and then I'll think about it for the next few hours.
Okay.
And I'll have a whole bunch more ready for
Okay, I look forward to it. Okay, well, thank you all, and I appreciate your comments, and yeah, it's good talking with you.